Something very scary to me as I talk to Christians. They have no idea what has been said in church history. They have no idea the horrors of history in regards to the Reformation and the abundance of riches in which they enjoy at our day and age this time, like that dusty Bible on their shelf, and why it's allowed to be there, why even up into America itself existing, how that happened, why that happened. Um, and the ever increasing disdain for those who paved the way for their version of Christianity. I like to best express that with things such as this. They've forgotten the commandment. They've forgotten their mother. Men like John Calvin, who gave birth to them, who they despise. Not realizing that such men in the flow of history have actually made it possible for them to have their Bible that they can chuck back at him, calling him a heretic. When they owe their lifeblood of their religion to men like this. Honor your father and mother is still a commandment. You have to do it. Yep, you have to. You have to keep the commandment. So I want to talk about history. This is a layout of, most everyone understands that this is a proper layout. Now, some secular scholars will try to remove Rome as the fourth beast, but history is history. So I'm gonna speak to this, presuming you believe that Daniel did indeed predict Jesus coming, even if you're not familiar with it. If you understand that much, if that's true, then of course Rome is the fourth beast. Daniel 2 lays the context for the visions of Daniel, starting with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And we get the layout of the timeline. Notice from 605 BC, when Daniel's written, according to the text itself, during the period of Babylon exile. And he ascends to his high position because he's able to predict or to interpret the King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, king of Babylon. And he predicts the successive kingdoms. Okay, Daniel 7 is what I want to more focus on here, where we get another vision echoing the same thing from Daniel 2. And we get descriptions of this power that opposes God, starting in Daniel 7. We start getting those details. And let's see. This is where we find out what the power looks like. He has a boastful mouth. And we get some of his exploits given to us in this chapter as well. Now, the question is, does that empire, and now notice this span of history, we have Babylon in Daniel's day, and then he's also there when Persia takes over, Medo-Persia, and then Greece is Alexander the Great from 331 to 168 BC. Then Rome takes over in 168 as the empire. It defeats, I think it's the Seleucid kings or whatever, ultimately. And of course, Rome is around as its pagan version, then it merges with the church. Of course, the church kind of takes over somewhere around you can quibble about when exactly the pagan Rome becomes papal Rome, but that's obviously just historical fact. But notice that period there of Rome before Jesus, it's there in the ruling empire when Jesus is born, and through his death, Pilate orders the death of Jesus, right? And then Historicists understand that because of this context of the successive kingdoms without gaps in it from Daniel's day all the way till Jesus' day is significant. Why? Because if you take the futurist view, essentially the whole period of time of the new covenant would be left out of the apocalyptic literature, the prophecy of the scriptures. Now, do you believe that Jesus is the focus of the Bible? Do you believe that that was always God's plan of redemption? I do. And so, what's the advantage of the historicist view? Well, it follows the context. Is God's plan really to bring back the old covenant system as it pertains to sacrifices and tell us nothing of the new covenant period or the Protestant Reformation or the persecution of all that time and the misrepresentation of justification and righteousness by faith, the gospel of salvation to the nations of the whole world? Do you believe that? Because those things happened. And the context set forth by Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 reaches, and then Daniel 8 reaches into our time and beyond, not leaving it bald. There's 2,000 years of history there. Look at Babylon stretches 150 years, Medo-Persia, another 200, Greece, 150, Rome, 700, just as papal Rome. But then we have the iron and clay mentioned. Is none of the things and the exploits that occur during the Roman period, the last empire? Because it's the mountain cut out without hands in Daniel 2 at the end that strikes the feet and is the everlasting kingdom that fills up the whole earth. The mountain cut out without hands, who do you think that is? So I wanted to read some of the attributes of this Roman power from Daniel 7. And I saw in a night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes, like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And this power is judged essentially here. I beheld till thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and his head was like pure wool, his throne was like the fiery flame. And wheels of fiery and burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, and the judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the little horn spoke, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Let me skip to some attributes here. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and nails of brass, which devoured, stamped the residue. And before whom, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And I beheld, and that same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them. The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it into pieces. And the 10 horns out of the kingdoms are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. He will speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hands until a time, times, and a dividing of times. And that after that, the kingdom shall be given to the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall obey and serve him. Okay, so he shall speak great words against the Most High. He's the fourth beast, the fourth kingdom, which is Rome. The next video, I'm going to go over the 10 heads, which come up at that time during the fourth beast, because that would be what becomes the European nations. And history is very interesting regarding the 1260 years and how the papal Roman Empire becomes the papal Roman Empire through the church, who goes astray. That's why she's a harlot woman riding the beast. You could say like the beast is the civil power, and when it merges with the church, she becomes a harlot. And history is very interesting regarding the opposition between the church and state and the other groups like the Ostrogoths or the Franks, which becomes France, which plays into that. But let's just put it this way. The fourth kingdom, the one that's destroyed and judged by God before the everlasting kingdom comes out of this fourth kingdom, Rome. And this little horn shall speak great words against the Most High, shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. It shall be given into his hand for the time, times, and half the time, which is 3.5 years, or 1,260 days in a lunar reckoning, which should be interpreted as years. And spoiler alert, that's how long, 1,260 years, the Roman Church had that sort of power in history, from 538 to 1798. And let's take a look at some of the things that was said about the Pope regarding my claim here that this is the Roman Church. You might not be aware of this. Let's see. Here's another timeline we can look at here. 605 being Daniel's time, and then just kind of like a simple overview of the history. Okay. Listen to this. Here's some history. Throughout the centuries of Rome's existence, the popes have regularly claimed to be divine. As the supposed successor of Peter, the Pope claims infallibility, the position of God on earth, and ability to judge and excommunicate angels. Cardinal Sarto, who became Pope Pius X, said this: the Pope represents Jesus Christ himself. This belief has so assimilated into society's thinking that it's believed by many beyond Catholic circles. According to Time, Pope John II's assassination attempt prompted a young Jewish man to say, "Shooting the Pope, it's like shooting God." In 1512, Christopher Marcellus said this to Pope Julius II: "Take care that we lose not that salvation, that life and breath which thou hast given us, for thou art our shepherd, our physician, our governor, thou art our husbandman. Thou art finally another God on earth." Just recently in 2004, Bishop Patrick Dunn of Auckland said this: "It seems that Pope John II now presides over the universal church from his place upon Christ's cross." The gloss of extravagantes of Pope John XII says this: "But to believe that our Lord God, the Pope, the establisher of said decretal and of this, could not decree as he did decree should be accounted heretical." If you don't take the words of the Pope as though they're the words of God, you are a heretic, in other words. Here's some quotes from popes throughout history. In 1302, Pope Boniface said this in a letter to the church: "Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. When they made coins saying the Pope was Pontifex Maximus, Pius Sextus Pontifex Maximus on coins from the 1700s. Pope Leo XIII said these things about the role of the papacy and the Roman Church. Our thoughts went out towards the immense multitude of those who are strangers to the gladness that filled all Catholic hearts. Some because they lie in absolute ignorance of the gospel, others because they dissent from the Catholic belief, though they bear the name of Christian. This thought has been and is a source of deep concern to us, capital U, for it is impossible to think of such a large portion of mankind deviating, as it were, from the right path as they move away from us, and not experience a sentiment of innermost grief. But since we hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. But the supreme teacher in the church is the Roman pontiff. Union of minds, therefore, requires, together with a perfect accord in the one faith, complete submission and obedience of will to the church and the Roman pontiff, as if to God himself. More recently, Pope John Paul II wrote that names like Holy Father are applicable to the Pope, even though calling him that is counter to the gospel. And I quote, "Have no fear when people call me the Vicar of Christ. When they say to me, Holy Father, or Your Holiness, or use titles similar to these, which seem even inimical to the gospel." Wow. In 1996, he also gave his assent to calling the Pope Lord and Christ on earth. 1996. And I quote, "We readily understand the devotion of St. Francis of Assisi for the Lord Pope, the daughterly outspokenness of St. Catherine of Siena towards the one whom she calls sweet Christ on earth, the apostolic obedience, and the sentir cum ecclesia of St. Ignatius Loyola, and the joyful profession of faith made by St. Teresa of Avila. I am a daughter of the Church." The papacy is not the only source of papal infallibility doctrines. Many Catholics and others use the titles of Christ to describe the Pope. As seen in the video, which I'll show, the video is featured in a lecture that all may be one by Professor Walter Veith. Let me play that. Let's see. Make this bigger. Yes, I can. All right.
The Good Shepherd. You felt like that he, was God himself almost, because he's such a holy man. Beautiful person. You just want to cry with him because it's just something about him. Holy Father. Holy Father. Touch me, Holy Father. Touch me, Holy Father. Please, sir, touch me, Holy Father. Holy Father. Holy Father. Touch me, Holy Father. Thank you.
Whoops. It's on mute. Sorry about that. It is clear that the popes have never reproved or rejected this title of blasphemy and flattery, but the Bible does not support the belief of papal infallibility. It declares that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. This includes the Pope. The boasts of the papal state fulfill the Bible's prediction of what the Antichrist power would do. He shall speak great words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change times and laws. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue for 42 months, which, by the way, is 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, which is times and half a time, which is where we first hear of the prophetic time period in a way that is not literal increments of time. But in fact, the book of Revelation and Daniel pretty much exhaust every possible way of speaking of this time period in ways that are not literal, as we see in literal narrative of the scriptures. When it's 3.5 years, it'll say 3 years and 6 months. In Daniel and Revelation, the symbolic time period understood as 1,260 years. Why? Because 3.5 years of Jewish actual calendar time in history never used a lunar calendar from Daniel's time forward. We know that historically. So 3.5 years cannot be 1,260 literal days, because there's no such thing as a 3.5 year period in Jewish time, in real life, in real history, which has those. No period of 3.5 years, no matter where you can start on any day you wish in history, any day of history. No time period of 3.5 years in real history has 1,260 days in it. No 3.5 year period in actual history time has 42 months in it. No matter what day you start on, you will have 43 months in 3.5 years. You will have 43 or 44 months, but it's called 42 months. It's called 1,260 days. It's called 3.5 years. It's called a time times and half a time. Is that an indication that it is actually 42 months? Actually 1,260 days? 3.5 years? No. In fact, it exhausts every possible way of demonstrating that increment of time in a way that is not congruent with itself in real history, if taken literally. And by making it literal, you are taking Christian history and saying nothing of prophecy is talking about that, even though we know the history that the papal power merged with the civic power when it took over the Roman Empire, which is the last empire, for 1,260 years. So this will end part one. Part two, I'll go into the 1,260 years from Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and how that's used in the book of Revelation. But if you consider the picture on the screen and the time periods that start the prophecies in the book of Daniel and Daniel 2, and they're reiterated in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and it's talking about the power, you could argue that it's the power behind, the spiritual power behind the empires that oppose God. Do you really think a 6-year period, the 2,300 evenings and mornings are days, or that the 3.5 years really does justice to the kind of history being spoken of, laid out in the context of Daniel 2? Does it look like God's leaving giant bald spots in there? Do you really think he would leave out the persecution of Satan and his minions on earth during the new covenant period, only to bring back a temple that the Antichrist is going to sit in with this huge bald spot? And it stops short before the new covenant begins, before Jesus is even born. And then it goes on pause, only to bring back the animal sacrifice systems and talk about the Pope in a literal, or the Antichrist in a literal temple, bringing back the sacrifices for sins that Jesus actually fulfills in the first century. It makes no sense. And it's absolutely false, and it's ignorant of history and the focus of the Bible, which is God's plan of salvation to call back all nations of the earth in Christ, which those sacrifices were types of, pointing to Jesus.